And we're live. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Competitive Conversations on the OPEX Remote Coaching Podcast. Today, we are discussing a super interesting and intricate to me and probably most people in the CrossFit space because we don't know about it as much. And the concept is durability, a more common concept, but I would still say fresh for some people in the endurance world. And yeah, we're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about, we're going to define it. We're going to talk about how it can help you, why it's important. And then on the next episode, this is going to be a 2, if not 3-parter. And we're going to discuss how to improve it next. But to understand how to improve it, we need to unpack it a little bit first, because the more you know, the more simple it will be and the more clear it will be on how we can get better at CrossFit, which is the end goal. But before we start off, we're gonna do a couple quick questions. Sam, what did you have for dinner? What are you going to have for dinner today?
Well, we have the second session of a 2-part class on giving birth. So, because my wife's pregnant, for those that don't know. And so we're doing this class at the hospital. We went to one 2 days ago, and today's the last day, or this evening's the last day. So we're going to get this place called Flower Child, which is here in Arizona. Yeah. It might be another, maybe you have one in Atlanta or something. I don't know.
We might, okay. But I know that they own a few restaurants, right?
Yeah, I think they're part of the Fox restaurant concept. So there's a lot of it's all owned by a central entity, and they're very healthy and high quality foods. So I got that on Tuesday. I'll probably get it again because it starts at 5:00, which we usually eat dinner at 5:45. So it's kind of pushing the dinner window a little bit early. Yeah. So it'll probably be vegetables and sweet potatoes and some steak or something like that. So it'll be good.
Nice. Yeah. We might have a Flower Tribe, but I know we have some Fox restaurants here.
Yeah, you probably have True Foods.
Can't remember. I'm not in the city that often, and I know that's where one or two of them are, wherever they are. But I remember looking it up because I think we got a gift card to a Fox gift card one time, and nice. That was one of them on it. Well, that was my next question. And where was the last place you ate out? But it sounds like you ate out Flower Child last as well.
Yeah, it was on Tuesday. So that sorry.
Sorry to disappoint. I guess it's a plug for Flower Child. Maybe it could be a sponsor one.
Yeah. Shout out to Flower Child.
Yeah. All right.
Is that the extent of your questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to start with food today. Unless you have a really good quote. Unless you got a good quote.
I mean, the quote that pertains to durability is great. But yeah, to give a little context for people. So this idea of durability, how I came across it was through a colleague, and to my knowledge, it's very prevalent in the cycling world, and also I think other endurance disciplines. But some of the research papers that I've read through that colleague pertain to cyclists, and I'm going to talk about the Tour de France a little bit too, because it'll kind of help illuminate this idea more. So in all of those things, they are, of course, endurance sports. So they're looking at performance over extended periods of time. And one of the key characteristics of people who are great at endurance sports is something we could classify as fatigue resistance, like how well you resist fatigue as the length of the task extends out further and further, because that's inherent in an endurance type discipline, is how much can you endure while expressing the task. So durability is synonymous with fatigue resistance. That would be another term you could use to classify durability. But the research definition for durability is the time of onset and magnitude of deterioration in physiological profiling characteristics over time during prolonged exercise. So it's looking at how quickly are you dropping power over time as you're doing work. And of course, what the rate is and how that's influencing your power output, let's say. That's what they're really looking at. And a quote from a paper that asked a question to kind of pose the thought for it was, what is causing the drop in power as more hours are added to your ride or race? And we could parallel that to CrossFit if you ask the question this way, where you say, what is causing fatigue to rise as the competition goes on further and further, more and more events that you accumulate. Why is fatigue rising more? Why is your output dropping? Why is your energy dropping more? And that's the comparable example to a cycling or a running based sport where it's a single discipline and they have, long races that they're going to do. So that's kind of what durability is. It's looking at how well or not well somebody handles fatigue as it accumulates across a large span of work. And CrossFit, it is an endurance sport, even though there's strong people inside of it, we want to leverage these ideas that are in other sports to help bolster our approach to training, design, preparation for the sport. And it's interesting. This is when I started learning more about this. And you also kind of saw this influx of zone 2 work in the CrossFit space. And it's still like kind of lingering around. But that idea, which at its base is just easy aerobic building volume, that's a staple in any type of endurance sport. Like a large percentage of the training volume they accumulate is easy work because it acts as the base of support. It helps with mitochondrial function. It helps with fuel utilization. It does a lot of things. It helps with volume tolerance, helps with intensity tolerance and the recoverability that you need from intensity. So it's fascinating that that's sneaking its way into the CrossFit space because CrossFit is becoming more and more of an endurance sport with its demands. So you need the scaffolding that you would have in other sports, which looks like easy work on a bike, on a rower, on a ski erg, running for some, but not a lot of people, because a lot of people just aren't good enough runners to make that zone 2 work. And the eccentric loading can pull away from the squatting or strength speed work they need to be doing in training. So it's cool and interesting that you're seeing this larger influx of like, I need to do more easy work, which makes sense because it's a big byproduct of what is required in endurance training, because a lot of the training has to be easy. Otherwise you can't accumulate a lot of volume, because if it's too intense, you can't do more. Like intensity and volume they run opposite each other. A whole different discussion, which we might have talked about on that Zone 2 episode, is whether or not you need to add into your training, whether it has applicability. So we're not going to get into that here because we talked about it on that previous episode. So durability, also known as fatigue resistance, we want to see how well or not well you starve off fatigue as the load on your system accumulates over a given competition or test or tasks you're performing. So some examples to give even further insight on that. If you've ever run a marathon, think of like the last 5 or 6 miles. That would be a test of your durability. Are you able to maintain your split those last 5 to 6 miles, even though your RPE is probably significantly higher? Do you have the capacity and volume built to maintain your pace, or are you losing it significantly? The last day of a 4-day competition, how's your performance on those 2 or 3 events you have to do? Is it dropping quite a bit? Is your energy lower? Is your body aching a lot? Is your motivation really low? And also on a more granular scale, the last piece of your training session. So maybe you had like 5 things to do. By the time you get to the 5th thing, how much energy do you have available to put into that piece of work? Part of it could be how the training is laid out, et cetera, but all that being equal, we also can look at durability from that lens as well. It's how well can you handle the tail end of the tasks that you have in front of you. And so one thing that really resonated with me when I started learning about this idea was when Rich Froning, to give a CrossFit example, when Rich Froning competed, every year he almost won every event on the final day of competition. He'd beat everybody. Like he'd be, some years he crushed everyone and it was just like a slaughter fest, but some years it was kind of close. And then through Saturday, it wasn't super certain if he was going to win. And then Sunday he wins like 3 events in a row. It's like, oh yeah, there he goes. Just dominates everybody. And then you saw that with Matt when he had his reign. Tia would always dominate on Sunday. And so you see this property emerge, which is the best in the sport always perform the best on the final day when their systems are maximally taxed because they have more reserves, they have better durability than their competitors. And a lot of that is training related, which we've talked about. Movement economy, allowing for movement expression, which allows for more volume accumulation and allows for better overall output and recoverability of the task, but also durability. So that idea of getting to the final day and having the resources available to express the test and beat other people. So in order to thrive in an endurance sport, you need to have great durability to handle the totality of tasks in front of you. And CrossFit is no different because it's not about winning the first event, it's about winning the last event. It's not about the first minute of the race, it's about the last 2-3 minutes of the race. It's not about winning the first round of an event, it's about winning the last round of an event. And you see, if you go to any CrossFit competition, you see this blatantly. You just watch people perform the first event, and you can quickly separate those that have a lot of training and understand themselves well versus those that are like so anxious and so stressed out being on a competition floor that they just it's like pedal to the metal as hard as possible, and they blow their load in the first event, and then every event thereafter they're just like running on fumes. So part of this you learn, of course, through your training and developing an awareness and a sense of understanding around how to use energy and how to allocate that effectively, which we'll talk more about. Last piece I wanted to tie in on that. I watched a great documentary this summer, which I'm sure a lot of people did, about the Tour de France. It was like Unchained, and super fascinating, super interesting. I suggest you'll watch if you haven't watched it, and I'd watch it in French and just have the English subtitles because the French language is beautiful. But what was fascinating about that sport, because that's like the ultimate endurance sport, where they're riding, I forget what it was, like 30 days with like 3 days off, and every day they're riding anywhere from like 2 to 4 hours with, like, it's just crazy. It's crazy what they're doing. The drugs aside, whatnot, it's super fascinating what they're doing. Like, it's true endurance sport. And what's fascinating to watch is how impactful durability is with those who are in contention for the yellow jersey, or those who are in contention to finish on the podium or in the top half, versus those who they just do the sprint. Like, they get into position on certain rides and then they try to win it via the sprint at the final end, versus those that are like actually trying to win the whole thing. Because there's like different competitions within the entire competition, which is fascinating. And so that's an example where the best do a great job of managing energy as the race is going on, so that the final hour or so, they start pulling away from the peloton, or even 2 hours in, they're starting to pull away and create separation because they have that capacity and ability built, and they just have better durability to withstand the fatigue that's going to accumulate as the miles or kilometers in their circumstance accumulate. So you'll start to see this in all sports, even sprinting too. Like, you got to have durability to handle preliminaries, the qualifying rounds, the semifinal, and then of course you got to have juice for the final, so you can set a world record, you can win a gold. So this concept of fatigue resistance, also known as durability, is everywhere in sport, where there are multiple iterations required, and or the task is extremely long and requires a lot of energy or time to accomplish the task. So that's durability in a nutshell. What it is, its origins, how it ties into CrossFit, and also why it is partially important.
Yeah. And it has a cool name, durability, and it's kind of like self-explanatory name. You could think of any like a shoe you have, it's durable, it lasts longer. You've had the shoe for a year and it's still, performing like you just got it. It's durable. So it's kind of, without getting into too much of the science, one could just understand it by just understanding the word pretty well, and kind of synonymous to resiliency, another cool word, and another word that people use a lot because you need to be resilient. But in terms of performance, you want to be more durable, meaning you want to be able to last longer or perform better towards the end. And I watched
real quick on that.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm glad you mentioned resilience, because I think when people think of resilience, they think more psychological, whereas durable, you could think a lot more physiological. So like what we're talking about is very specific to your physiology. There is a big psychological component, but what you're trying to do in training or you're trying to create through this process is develop durability physiologically for what you actually have to do. So it's like a hardware software thing, and this definitely falls in the hardware bucket. So sorry to jump in, but just wanted to make
Yeah. That's a better way to think about it. And yeah, I watched a movie. I haven't seen the Unchained documentary, so I need to watch that. But I watched a
It's
new
good.
movie called The Boys in the Boat. Have you heard of it?
Oh, I've read the book. It's a great book. I haven't watched the
Okay.
movie yet, though.
I didn't even know there was a book. I need to read it now. But basically,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's really good.
it's about a JV boat on the Washington College rowing team in the 40s or in the 30s, excuse me. Pre-World War II, their goal to get to Germany to the Olympics, and they're basically a bunch of working class boys just trying to get their college paid for, but they're very resilient because they're the working class. They have to compete well or they lose their scholarship, and it's not the easiest time. And then they're kind of they have kind of like a jockey, the guy in the boat that's telling him what to do, but he sets at the race. So they basically start a little bit behind. They wait for the other boats to tire, and then they finish stronger than everyone, and they're holding a higher stroke per minute. It's cool seeing the visualization of it, but they're finishing way harder, and it's a good representation of like they're having a steady pace, and then they still have the juice at the end to finish strong, and they're it's like a 6 to 7 minute event most of the time for what they were doing, but a good inspiring movie, and it was pretty good. So yeah, but it just lent to the idea of durability a
Yeah,
little bit as well. They didn't even
yeah. I
know.
mean, you only have to. Yeah, you only have to beat them by a second to win. So
Hmm.
you don't need you don't need to win by 2 hours or an hour or 10 minutes or 5 minutes. Like you only need to beat them by a little bit. And if you have a lot of things to do, then it would be wise to like use as little as you can to get a great outcome, so you have more available later on, which is also why you don't see people blowing their load early in a competition, because they know they have so much more work to do. And that ties into, I guess we could segue to how to think about durability inside of your training.
Hmm.
um, I'm thinking now, do we want to talk about that right now, or do we want to go to let's pause on that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the factors that influence durability first. I think that let
Okay. Yeah.
me share those, and then we
Yeah.
can talk about um, how you want to think about durability inside of your training or testing that you're doing. Because yes, we can think about it more globally, like your training volume and building your physiology, but you can zoom it into an actual test or a session and think about the durability of a body part or your body as a whole, and how you want to use that to influence your pacing strategy with what you're doing. So before we get to that, there are 7 main factors that will influence durability. And so you can think about these as levers you can pull on to help improve your durability or possibly um, hinder it. Because some of them you might not be able to change, or
Hmm.
technically only one of them you can't really change. The rest you can actually change quite a bit. So you do have a lot of malleability here. So the first one's intensity. So if we've been talking about endurance training, and usually endurance activities are not that intense because they're very long. Like I mentioned, intensity and volume are run opposite each other. You can't have a ton of intensity and a ton of volume. It doesn't work, because power and time have a very
Inverse.
I don't want to say that. No, I don't want to. Yeah, but there's a name for the graph. I don't want to say. I don't want to misspeak on what it's called. It's a shoot. What's that called? It's a goes. It's a is that a uh, parabolic? No, it's not. Hold on, I'm gonna look
Mm-mm.
this up right now. Parabolic equation.
Another note on the cycling world,
Nope, it's not
I think
parabolic. So maybe it's hyperbolic.
we're very lucky to have the how much money is in cycling, because it gives us a lot of data and a lot of really good a lot of good
Yes.
incentives to coaches out there, because we can learn a lot from the endurance community, especially in cycling, because we are an endurance sport
Yeah,
ourselves.
so
So
it's a it's a hyperbolic relationship. So I just wanted to verify. I don't want to misspeak. So time is short, power is super high, and then over time it just goes down, 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 like near zero, but it doesn't really quite reach zero. So intensity, if intensity is really high, then durability will play a role, but you're not going to see it. You're not really going to see the demand on fatigue resistance, because there's not enough time present to distinguish that. But as we extend it out, now it becomes a lot bigger of a factor. So the intensity inside of your training can influence the development of this characteristic or the lack thereof. So if you're doing a lot of intensive training, you might not be building enough volume to actually develop the durability you need for not only more work volume, but also the tasks you might have to have in a competition. So intensity being one of the factors that will influence durability. Training volume is the next one. So having more total volume under your in your tank is going to allow you to buffer fatigue more effectively and influence your recoverability, so your ability to get back on whatever you're doing. It also allows you to handle intensity more effectively. So one of the studies, which maybe we'll put this in the notes, they were looking at cyclist training volume comparative to like the junior class versus like the professional class versus like the elite class. I forget the hierarchy of classes. And one of the factors they were watching was for training volume, and then how the weekly, monthly volume was influencing outcomes when they did race. And you saw a pretty good relationship between total training volume and I think it was average power across the test when you looked at professionals to those like right below the professionals. In the lower ranks, where the total amount of work they had to do, it was pretty negligible. So a parallel example to CrossFit would be, if you're doing a 1-day competition, this idea of durability doesn't necessarily matter that much, unless you had to do like 5 events over 1 day. Then it matters a little bit more. But if like you did one event in 1 day, not a really big deal. But
open
when you
versus
add
quarterfinal.
more and more, yeah, exactly. Especially 3 weeks. But yeah, you add more you add more events, you add more time that's required, and it starts to become more and more important how well you can handle that. So training volume, nutrition, this is huge in the endurance world, and I've actually been now learning this a lot because I'm training for a half marathon. So I've been starting to practice taking in carbohydrates while I run, which has been interesting, feeling the effects after I take 20 grams of carbs and some caffeine, how my RPE like goes down a little bit and my pace feels like I can speed up a little bit. This is very fascinating. And you look at some of the elite marathon runners, I mean, they're taking in 80 grams an hour of carbohydrates for multiple hours. It's like, constant fuel going into the system. So nutrition is really, really important, and lack thereof can really influence the deterioration of your fitness characteristics as you're working. Tying it into CrossFit, nutrition between events. Are you refueling after bouts of work? Are you getting in electrolytes, hydration, carbohydrates? That's definitely something that people, if you aren't practicing it before you go to competitions, usually it's a very challenging thing for people because they just don't, they don't know what their body's going to be able to handle with that level of stress and anxiety going on. And so usually they're under fueled. So then when they go compete, each successive event, performance is dropping a little bit more and more because you just don't have enough energy available to perform. So nutrition is a really important one. Learning not only how do you use it intra workout if it makes sense given your goals, but more importantly, in between events or sessions to ensure you have available resources. Pacing, the next one, number 4, very important, because if the task is unsustainable, specific to CrossFit, pacing is the next thing you're going to be thinking about. Because if I can't throttle down the entire time, which you can't, then I have to start thinking about what's my pacing strategy to allow me to get through the work as optimally as possible to get the best score. And we'll talk about it next. Also, then thinking about what is potentially going to be limiting me in this workout with respect to fatigue, and how do I got to adjust my pacing strategy to accommodate for that. So another piece, influencing durability. And then side of course, endurance sports, think about cycling. Your pace is paramount, because if you start the first 30 minutes of a 3-hour race too fast, you're utilizing resources that are limited. Now you have to slow down to recoup those. You recoup energy a lot slower than you use it. The great analogy I can give is it's a lot easier to withdraw money from a bank account than it is to put money in a bank account. It's the same with energy in the body. It's easier to use energy than it is to recuperate it, especially while you're actively working. So proper pacing is imperative for long duration events. And we can, of course, apply that to CrossFit, where you're working like the CrossFit Games, where you're going to compete for 4 or 5 days. You need to be cognizant of pace and effort and strategy, such that when you get to Sunday, you do have energy available. Doesn't mean you're not working hard in the first 3 to 4 events, but you're not selling your soul on every single event, because you have to be smart with some of the events and how you're going to strategize to get the best outcome while thinking about the entire task and challenge in front of you. You can't be blind to that. Otherwise, it's just going to bite you in the butt when it really matters the last few days. And if somebody says otherwise, I don't think they're thinking that through enough. Or if it's an athlete saying that, then they are unconsciously pacing, whether or not they think they are. But nowadays, I think the top athletes are a lot more cognizant of that. And so they are thinking about their pace and strategy for the event than just like, I'm going to turn my brain off and just rip it. They don't think that way anymore. They're a lot more conscious of their approach, execution, what's coming next, how they need to manage fatigue. Like they're a lot more intelligent with their approach. And also it's reflective too of the tests and the testing body. It's changed too. And then 5 is mental fatigue. Mental fatigue can influence durability. So this is, this pertains to CrossFit too. But with endurance sports, where you're going longer, RPE is going to be slowly rising, which of course is a cognitive drive, your rate of perceived exertion. So the brain is giving you a signal on the amount of effort it's having to exert to work, to perform the work that you're doing. So this is where fueling can be very important. So ensuring you have necessary fuel to combat some of the cognitive costs that are associated with competing and the events you have to do. So great fueling, hydration, electrolytes. I guess that would be the time for CrossFit off the top of my head, thinking about how do we manage mental fatigue such that durability isn't negatively influenced. So being aware of fueling, proper fueling, before training or before competing, between events, after events, to try to manage the wear on the nervous system. Of course, rest too, like that goes without being said. And then pain. So this is a really big one. Pain influences durability. So and everybody perceives pain differently. So that's of course another wrench in the system. But if your RP is too high too early, your body's gonna slow down instantly. Like you're not, like you whether or not you want to keep working hard, your system's gonna like put on the brakes. So if the pacing is inappropriate, Are the pain levels reached too high of a threshold, then you will start to see changes in the execution of the work, or also your output if you're running, or you're on a machine, or you're on a bike. Something that's super interesting that I've played with running specifically to mitigate pain is using acetaminophen, because that will inhibit some of the pain receptors. So your sense of pain will go down a little bit, and it allows you to kind of buffer. And there was a really good paper showing this. Allows you to buffer. I don't want to say buffer. That's the wrong word. It allows you to manage your sense of discomfort with long duration activity like running. So that's
not medical advice.
No. But that's also great. That's why people use caffeine. That changes your RPE and your sense of pain. Carbohydrates, sugars do that too. So there are lots of tools out there that can help you manage pain, because if pain is too high, it's going to influence your ability to keep working at high rates. So also as training, this is where training ties into all of these, but great training is going to hopefully prepare your sense of discomfort and willingness to deal with it effectively, and be, I wouldn't say conditioned, but comfortable with it as well. So training, it goes without saying, influences all of these to a great deal as well. And then finally is age, which is the one variable that you can't really change. So age will influence durability with how, with your, I should have brought up that paper. There was a super interesting paper on, I might be able to find it. They were looking at there was like the world like masters track and field championships, and they were looking at different age groups and their like half marathon, 10K, 5K, mile, 100-meter sprint times or something like that. And they're looking at like the deterioration over time of output. And of course, as the events got longer and longer, the deterioration was a lot smaller. So partially because the power demands are getting lower and lower. So the enduring capabilities are, I wouldn't say more comparable, but as you get older, you can be more competitive and hold on to those characteristics a lot longer than you can your power based characteristics. There was something else along those lines too with that paper that ties into this point that I'm blanking on. So I'm not going to try to talk as if I remember what it is. So I'll kind of leave it at that. But those 7 factors can influence your durability, your ability to resist fatigue. And so you can take those into your brain and then think about, okay, what am I doing for each of those with my training or with things outside of training to put me in a great position to have more durability and have the ability to handle fatigue more effectively when not only when I train, but also when I do compete. So these are things we can be thinking about to put ourselves in better positions for when it matters, when we do, when we compete or test or whatever it might be that our goal is.
Yeah. So when we're talking about durability as a concept, kind of like how we would say strength, like we're improving strength, that doesn't just mean we're improving our 1RM. Or same with durability. We're not just improving. There's not like a single metric of durability. Like, hey, we've just improved this marker of durability. It's broad as well. And the concept is like a way of training and something we can express as well. Similar, just for the listeners to understand that it's not like if they're thinking they're missing something, like, okay, I still am not really grasping, like you haven't explained exactly durability well. It's a concept, not like not a specific thing. It is, but it's broad.
You could, so that paper or that article I sent you with the graph, you can pull it up for those that are watching, so they can see what
the
one. The one with the
second one.
cyclists.
Oh,
yeah. So
Sorry.
you can make tests, because they have tests in cycling and running where you can quantify, has your durability improved from 3-4 months ago. So if you look at this without deeply describing the study, what they were looking at, they want to see a fresh max effort from the start and measuring
let's
that.
Let's call it like a 60-minute time trial.
No, it's more than that. It has to be longer. It's like 2 hours. So you do like a max effort for like 5 minutes, and then they're measuring like what are your average watts for the 5 minutes. Then you ride 2 hours. It has to be super long. So that's the only, like, the gap between this world over here, which is like uber endurance, and then like the CrossFit, because CrossFit is endurance, but it's not like cycling or running endurance. That's a whole nother. This being an example. It's like this study, they needed to go 2 hours. But that's a very interesting point, because it also it speaks to the nature of the activity. The activity allows them to do something for 2 hours at a sustained rate, whereas you can't do wall balls and muscle ups for 2 hours at a sustained rate. So, we've talked about it before. I'm not going to get into it, but 5 minutes, really hard effort. What's the max watts you're going to put out? Ride for 2 hours at a moderate pace. Then you do 5 minutes again as hard as you can, and you see what the gap is in the average output of power. And so that drop is what they're assessing, is how they're assessing durability. Who had the smaller drop? And so to give a CrossFit example, you could go do a max unbroken set of muscle ups, then do an hour of rowing, and then do a max unbroken set of muscle ups. And how much of a drop do you see in the muscle ups in the second set? That would be an example, a parallel example of how we could test durability. You also do this in training too. Like, I'll give somebody a great example would be the open workout from 2023, the first one, which was a repeat from 2014. 14-minute AMRAP, 60 cal row, 50 toes to bar, 40 wall balls, 30 power cleans, 20 ring muscle up. The way you could assess durability looking at that, let's say you did it for time, not as an AMRAP, you would want to see, after 6 months or so, what's the split for the 20 muscle ups for somebody? Because that's the test. The other stuff's just fluff. The real test is how quickly can you get through the 20 muscle ups? And so that's assessing, amongst other things, like, how is your durability such that you can get through the 20 fast or faster than you did previously. So that's an example of something I give to people, and I've given it to quite a few recently, as we're getting ready for the open and quarterfinals, as an assessment for me, looking at a higher level skill. How is it in the presence of quite a bit of fatigue, with musculature that is involved in the expression of the movement? So that's one way we could look at durability. Another example, I'm going to come back because I have another thing I want to share. Another example would be, you do on a 60-minute clock, which I've given a games athlete this before in training. You do Murph with a vest, and then in remaining time in the 60 minutes, you have to build to a max clean and jerk. So how close to your maximum is that clean and jerk after all that fatigue? And they're two scores. So you get a score for Murph, you get a score for the clean and jerk. So that would be testing durability of the clean and jerk in the presence of a lot of fatigue. So it'd be a good CrossFit example. And that's also why you see a lot of testing a maximum or a heavy lift after doing front-loaded fatigue. That's essentially, they're testing durability. And that's just some language we could use to look at that and go, okay, I understand what's going on here. And that's also why in training you're doing progressions and tools to like get better at lifting in the presence of fatigue, not when you're fresh, because very rarely are you tested that way. What I wanted to, or before I share my example, did you have anything from that, or questions or anything?
Yeah. So
piece
if
of
you're
time.
looking at the graph, when I was referring to 60 minutes, I wasn't referring to a test. I was referring to like if we ignore everything and just look at like at the start line and the finish line at 60 minutes, and that's your pace is the blue line at whatever wattage
Mm-hmm.
this is, and by the end, this is now what your wattage is. It's declining. That would be like your durability by the end. You're getting slower. So if you could next time raise the bar on the right, then you would have improved durability. Not necessarily a test, but just an example of how you are more durable. Um, or if you just if you started even higher and finished even higher, but still had the same drop off, that would essentially be more durable as well. Do you understand what I'm saying, or no?
No, because the max effort is a separate pace from what you had to do in between the max efforts.
No. I was saying that, like ignore any of the text. Let's just say
Okay.
you're just doing an event that was 60-minute time trial of some
Uh-huh.
loops, and you started at
Yeah.
400 watts and then you finished at 350 watts. That drop
Gotcha.
off is basically that's your durability is you're decreasing. But if you started at 400 the second time you did it a year later and you finished at this now red bar is an inch higher and you finished at 380, you've now become more
Yeah.
durable.
Yeah. You could say there was improved durability. You could also discuss pacing and was that the appropriate,
Yeah.
but it is a good that's yeah. Uh,
Was
so
there
I
something
wanted to
else you want me
share
to
as
pull up?
a no, I this was because I wanted to then talk about how people can think about durability inside of training and also testing. Because yes, we want to think about durability more globally for someone, like training volume, uh, like the training year, like just kind of like big picture. Are we building fatigue resistance over time? And so one of those measures also would be, are you doing more training over time? That doesn't mean you're spending more hours in the gym, but are you doing more work inside of the confines of time you have allocated for training? Because that would be an indirect example of building durability. Like you're able to handle more, not at the expense of um, dropping fitness, but improving your fitness. Like you're getting better and doing more work. So year over year, there should be improvements for a competitor in volume tolerance and also weekly volume in training as well. But if we zoom in and we look at your actual training or the testing you're doing, we can also think about durability. We can think about durability of a particular body part, or we can think about durability as like our body as a whole. So I'll give two examples. So example one would be specific to a body part or a region. I had a quarterfinal camp recently, and the fifth event was a 9-minute AMRAP of 30 toes to bar, 15 snatches, 135, 95 pounds, 30 chest to bar, 15 power cleans, 135, 95, 30 bar muscle ups, and then remaining time was clean and jerks at 135, 95. So that test was testing, in a sense, durability of your grip in your forearm flexors. How well could you manage fatigue accumulating in this region, your grip, such that when you got to the muscle ups, you could do big sets to get past them to get to the clean and jerk. And so you
Mm-hmm.
had to be from rep one to the very last rep you did, every single repetition was draining the finite resources in your grip musculature. So you look at that test and you go, I need to maximize my durability of my grip musculature so that when I get to what matters, the bar muscle ups, I have enough juice to actually get through them so I can get to the bar for the clean jerks, which is not easy to do. And so what some people did, they didn't think about that. And they thought what some people do think about in those circumstances, they're like, I got to get through this stuff as fast as I can so I have a lot of time to
Mm-hmm.
then do muscle ups, which that's the wrong way to think about it, because if you move through it faster, you will drain your resources faster and they don't recover as fast. Remember the bank analogy. You pull money out of your savings account way faster than you put it back in. So you can't think, if I get through it fast, I have more time to do more work. It's like you can't recover fast enough. You're going to waste time sitting there trying to recover. If you're elite, that's different. But for most people, you have to think of it as, how do I properly pace the work so I have enough juice for what actually matters, which is the bar muscle up. So that's specific to a body part or a region, which would be like your grip. So that's important. Now think about like the whole body. Then we're thinking about, if you had to do, a good example would be the Camp Pendleton workout from the games in like 2012, where they had to swim and then they had to bike really long. They had to do like a long triathlon. So in a triathlon, where it's a big endurance event, you're thinking about like your total body and the durability of your body to do the work and not bonk or start cramping a lot. So you're cognizant of how you're working, how you're, what's fatiguing, if at all, how do you adjust your positioning to try to minimize that, your fueling, your hydration. So you're going from more localized to more holistic to think about how you're going to approach the task. You could also think about it too with like a 30-minute 30-minute AMRAP. Let me give an example of, I was going to use the one from the quarterfinals of the rowing and the VFs, but that's not a good example because you had to manage fatigue locally for your core, for your VFs and the GHG sit-ups. So if you push those too fast, it's mainly the VFs, then you would break down or you start getting no reps. So that's not a good example. But let's say
you trying to think of something mixed or something cyclical?
Well, it can be mixed, but there isn't localized fatigue. So example would be 10 rounds, 500-meter row, 15 burpees, which is a test I give a lot of people. It's like an extended, in CrossFit, you could call it an endurance test, but it's not really an endurance test. 10 rounds, 500-meter row, 15 burpees. You're not necessarily creating any localized fatigue in either of those movements if you have enough volume built. So you're thinking more about your systemic fatigue from just the work that you're doing. So that's where your pace on the row has to be sufficient, such that you're not draining resources for when you get back to the burpees, because the burpees, every time you do the burpee, you're dropping energy. Like every repetition, it's going down, down, down. And then when you row, ideally it's ticking up just a little bit. So if you row too fast and it can't tick up, then the burpee pace is going to slow a bunch, and you're just going to fall off pace. So now you're thinking more about the interplay between the two and making sure your body can keep working at a consistent rate for all 10 rounds. Whereas the 9-minute AMRAP, it's like all about my grip, or the first quarterfinal event, all about the handstand push-ups, the 21 at the end. Everything that precedes it, I have to pace effectively. Otherwise I get to the wall and I fail like the first rep, and now I'm doing singles and I'm screwed. So that's one way we can, if we zoom in, we can think about durability specific to the training we're doing, thinking about the bottlenecks inside of the work that we're doing, and then coming up with strategies to manage the durability of the body part that is most important to the work that we're doing. Or if it's a more global, holistic task, then we can just kind of think about our entire body. So our breathing, our sweating, internal temperature and whatnot, like if it was a long run event or something like that, because that wouldn't be specific. Like the grip example, running would be like your actual, just your whole system working. So hopefully that was clear.
Yeah. And you could probably have one with both, like maybe like the marathon row, where if you're not pacing correctly, or if you just have a serious limitation in grip or quad or something, or you're not hydrating well, which is kind of like the factors influencing durability. If one of those are missing in something like that, then the local fatigue and local durability would become an issue versus, you might still be able to hold the pace and feel good, but your quads are so fatigued you couldn't push.
Yes. Great example. Yeah. And even with running, if the pace is too fast or you're overstriding and now your anterior tib is getting lit up and it's like you're fatiguing too much there, and like you're creating a local fatigue point that's influencing your ability to keep working at a consistent rate. So rowing's a great example because if you're pulling too much with your arms, and your arms and grip are fatiguing too much, or your upper back is weak, so like you don't have good postural endurance, and now it's harder to like stay upright. And so there's you can quickly turn something that should be more holistic into a localized limitation with improper pacing or technique, which I think we've talked about. We've talked about technique before, and pacing. Very important. So,
Yeah. We could touch real quick on how durability training can help you. We kind of already talked about it, like the micro and the macro, but the more durable you are on a micro scale, the less fatigue in a single workout or modality you would have. So like if you're just thinking of one specific workout, I'm more durable now. I can hit a heavier clean and jerk at the end of the workout, or I can finish stronger, or I have a stronger pace throughout the entire event. And as a macro, you have less fatigue over the multi-day, which we also talked about. So if you whether you want to hold back in pace or not, if you're in quarterfinals, you have to perform well in each workout. So it's not like you can hold. You talk about pace, but that doesn't mean you're holding back to like 60% effort. It means you're holding back enough to finish and do the best you can. So you're still technically giving it 100%. You're just pacing it so that you can do that. So you're still going to be fatigued. So you need to, and then you need to do that again and again. And where the factors that are going to influence durability are now going to be factors that are going to influence your performance in the multi-day event as well. So they kind of all coincide.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Because if you only had, think of it this way. If I asked you to do just one 10-minute max assault bike test for calories, you would approach it very differently if I said you're going to do one today, you're going to do one in 2 hours, you're going to do one tomorrow morning, you're going to do one 2 hours after that, you're going to do one the next morning, and you're going to do one 2 hours after that. The first 10-minute test, you would, even if it was 5 calories less, you would alter your approach because you knew there was more you had to do. You knew there was more to come. And so that's an important concept with this idea of durability is you need to be thinking about what's to come, because that's going to influence your pacing strategy, how you approach the work you're going to do. But it doesn't mean you're going to like mail it in and like, I'm just, I'm going to give 50% effort. It's like, well, then you're not going to win or accomplish anything. So learning how to give as much effort as possible, but not so much to where you can't repeat it for successive bouts over multiple days. So that's the ultimate test inside of the sport of CrossFit when looking at durability.
Yeah. Okay. If you have any listener questions real quick, you can drop them in, but we covered durability in broad strokes, and we talked about what it is and why it's important and what things can influence it. Part 2, next week, we are going to discuss training durability, more specifically what sessions would look like, how they can improve something a little more specific and globally, and how we can utilize durability training maybe to improve a specific weakness and what that could do for you. Everyone's homework is listen and watch the Unchained documentary. Maybe that'll help you a little bit. Watch or read if you have the speed to read The Boys in the Boat. I think that's what it's called. You can
Boys in the Boat.
They can give you a little more context. And so durability, a really big piece of a really big thing, or a knowledge base of what people could understand better to enhance their training and probably their performance in testing and competing. So you want to improve your durability. It's like resiliency for the body. That's what we're gonna It's our new name, but
It is. That's what
resiliency,
it is.
mental, get better mentally. Everyone talks about that. You got to be mental, but you can't always just push through something mentally. So how can we make ourselves more durable? So yeah. Any final notes, anything to lead into next week?
No, that was great. And it was a good wrap up. I hope something in there clicked for someone because I'm still learning about this idea and trying to articulate it is challenging. So hopefully it wasn't too convoluted. But I'm glad I was able to share, and hopefully it clarified my thinking a little bit more. But yeah, next week we'll give some examples, ways.
Yeah.
I'm trying to build it with clients, and hopefully it'll change the way you're thinking about training and ways in which you build the characteristics you need inside of training to compete at higher levels. And then I have 5 summary points that I'll share next week too, that kind of like wrap up durability and things you can kind of think about as it pertains to training and also competing.
Yeah. And I've myself have done this durability training for CrossFit specifically, and I like it a lot, and it's definitely helped me improve a lot. And I've done it from a cyclical aspect and mixed all of it together, and it's really helped, and it's enjoyable training, and it's very knowing more about it helps it become more intentional. And I think it's a style of training where you can really get into like it's separating it from competing, but really knowing while you're doing it how it is going to improve my competition. So, and we'll get into that more next week. But just a side note, I've done it and it feels great. So maybe you guys can try it soon after next week if you're not already doing it.
Awesome.
So that's a wrap. Thank you everyone for listening. Comment any questions if you have anything for next week. We'd love to see you in the chat. So please feel free to do that. And you can also finish this up on YouTube or Spotify. So we'll see you next week.